In a quiet mansion, a lonely old man found a new reason to smile. An unexpected young woman came along with promises of care. Amid suspicions, twists, and a $1 million inheritance, everyone revealed their true colors. In the end, a bitter gesture shattered all illusions and showed who truly deserved his love. Before you dive into this shocking story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. In an imposing mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city, time seemed to drag on for Walter Anderson, 75 years old. The wide corridors and luxurious rooms, once filled with life and laughter, now echoed only with the sound of his slow footsteps. The walls adorned with valuable artwork witnessed day after day, the loneliness consuming the old patriarch since Eleanor, his wife of nearly 5 decades, had departed from this world 3 years ago. Walter observed the garden through the library window, his private refuge. The books he once loved could no longer fill the emptiness he felt. He sighed deeply as his wrinkled fingers caressed the framed photo of Eleanor on the mahogany desk. "You know, my love," he murmured to the portrait, as if Eleanor could hear him, "our children called today, company anniversary. 50 years. They only sent messages, not even a visit." Walter had built an empire in the real estate sector, starting from nothing, with determination and hard work. His 5 children, Richard, Frank, Caroline, Monica, and Greg, grew up in the luxury that money provided, but none of them inherited the humility and values that Walter tried to teach them. Now, all successful, they managed different parts of the empire he had built, but rarely crossed the mansion's gate to visit their father. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Walter answered with the hope that it might be one of his children. "Grandpa?" The youthful voice of Luke, his only grandson, brought a smile to his face. "Luke, my boy, what a joy to hear your voice. I'm coming to visit you. I'll be there in half an hour. Is that okay?" "Of course, my son. I'll ask Mrs. Olivia to prepare that cornbread you like so much." Luke was Richard's son, Walter's firstborn. Unlike his father, who was only interested in business and money, the 25-year-old young man maintained a genuine connection with his grandfather. He had a degree in architecture and worked for an independent firm, refusing to join the family business. This caused frequent friction with Richard, but brought grandfather and grandson even closer. Mrs. Olivia, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for more than 30 years, smiled when she saw Walter excited about his grandson's visit. She knew well the dynamics of that family and suffered witnessing the abandonment her employer faced. "That boy Luke is an angel in this house, isn't he, Mr. Walter?" she commented while preparing the cornbread. "He has Mrs. Eleanor's heart." "He does, Olivia. He's the only one who remembers I have feelings." When Luke arrived, the mansion came to life. The young man hugged his grandfather tightly and handed him a small package. "For the company anniversary. 50 years isn't for just anyone, Grandpa." Walter opened the package carefully, revealing a restored antique pen. "It was my great-grandmother's, remember? The one you showed me in those old photos. I found it in an antique shop and had it restored." Walter's eyes welled up. "How did you remember that? I only mentioned this pen once." "I pay attention to your stories, Grandpa. Every detail." They spent the afternoon reviewing photo albums and talking about the golden years of the company. Walter shared stories he had never told his children, who had always been too busy to listen. Luke absorbed every word, fascinated by his grandfather's journey. "Did you know your father never wanted to know how I started?" Walter commented, without bitterness, just stating a fact. "When I tried to show him the first office in the old downtown area, he said he'd rather see the new luxury developments." "He doesn't know what he's missing," Luke replied sincerely. "The best stories are at the beginning of the journey, not in the final result." In the evening, after dinner, sitting on the veranda overlooking the illuminated garden, Luke noticed that his grandfather seemed tired. "Grandpa, are you okay? You seem down today." Walter sighed. "Loneliness weighs heavy, my son. This house is too big for one man alone. You know, when your grandmother was here, we had music every night. She played piano in that room." He pointed inside the house. "Now, I only have silence as company. Luke held his grandfather's hand firmly. Why don't you come live with me? My apartment is small, but... No, no, Walter interrupted with a gentle smile. This is my home, full of memories. Besides, I don't want to be a burden to you. You would never be a burden, Grandpa. Luke's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Richard, demanding his presence at a family meeting the following morning. Luke frowned. Problems? Asked Walter. Dad wants a meeting tomorrow, probably to discuss once again my stubbornness in not joining the company. Your father never understood that happiness isn't measured by money in the bank, Walter commented, looking at the stars. I tried to teach them that, but I failed as a... Father? Don't say that, Grandpa. The choice was theirs. Before saying goodbye, Luke promised to return on the weekend, and Walter felt his heart warm. It was amazing how his grandson's presence brightened his days, and at the same time made his departure more painful, returning the mansion to the darkness of solitude. The next day, Walter decided to walk through the garden to exercise his legs. Mrs. Olivia watched him from the kitchen window, concerned. At 75, he maintained a dignified and elegant appearance, but the housekeeper noticed the small signs of fragility that were beginning to appear. That's when it happened. Walter tripped on an uneven spot in the stone path and fell, twisting his right ankle. The sharp pain made him groan loudly. Mrs. Olivia ran to help him along with the gardener. Mr. Walter, for God's sake, I'll call an ambulance. No need to exaggerate, Olivia. It's just a sprain. But when he tried to stand up, the pain prevented him. Reluctantly, he allowed them to call an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed a moderate sprain that would require rest and physical therapy. Walter sighed, displeased with the idea of being immobilized. Mrs. Olivia immediately called all 5 children. None answered. She left messages, explaining what had happened, mentioning that their father was in the hospital. When she finally managed to speak with Monica, the middle daughter, she received a cold response. I'm in an important meeting right now, Olivia. If it's nothing serious, I'll see Dad when I have some free time in my schedule. The housekeeper swallowed her indignation and tried Richard, who was equally distant. I've already told you to hire a nurse, Olivia. Call my secretary, she'll take care of it. When Luke found out about the accident, he immediately left the important presentation he was giving and rushed to the hospital. He found his grandfather alone in the room, looking out the window with a dejected expression. Grandpa, I came as soon as I heard. How are you feeling? Walter's eyes lit up when he saw his grandson. Ah, my son. It was just a scare. But I'm fine now. The doctor said I can go home tomorrow. Luke noticed the absence of his uncles and father. No one else came? Walter looked away. They must be busy with their important commitments. Indignation grew inside Luke. How could they be so insensitive? He decided at that moment that he wouldn't leave his grandfather alone during his recovery. He would spend the nights at the hospital and then take him home, ensuring he had all the necessary care. I'm going to stay with you tonight, Grandpa. You don't need to, my son. You have work tomorrow. Work can wait. Family comes first, Luke responded firmly. During the night, as Walter slept in the hospital bed, Luke observed his grandfather's serene semblance from the uncomfortable chair beside him. He thought about how this strong and determined man, who had built an empire, now seemed so vulnerable, and how unfair it was that his own children didn't recognize his worth. The next morning, Luke received a call from Richard. Where are you? You missed the meeting. I'm at the hospital with Grandpa. He fell yesterday and sprained his ankle. Oh yes, Olivia told me. But it wasn't necessary to miss the meeting for that. I hired a nurse. Dad, you really don't get it, do you? Luke replied, controlling his irritation. It's not about hiring someone. It's about being present when family needs you. Richard was silent for a few seconds. I have a company to run, Luke. Your grandfather understands that better than anyone. Yes, he does. He perfectly understands what it means to be abandoned by his own children. Luke hung up, frustrated. When he turned around, he saw that Walter was awake and had heard the conversation. "Don't be so hard on your father, Luke," said Walter with a tired voice. "I made mistakes too. Maybe I gave too much importance to work when they were little." "That doesn't justify it, Grandpa. They're adults now. They make their own choices." That afternoon, Walter was discharged. Luke accompanied him to the mansion, where Mrs. Olivia had prepared everything to receive him. The doctor recommended absolute rest for a week and physical therapy sessions for at least a month. "I'm going to stay here with you during these days, Grandpa," announced Luke as he helped Walter settle into his favorite armchair in the library. "I can't accept that, my son. You have your life, your work. I've already arranged everything. I can work remotely and will hire a physical therapist to come here every day." Walter felt his eyes well up, moved by his grandson's care. The comfort that Luke's presence brought was undeniable, temporarily filling the void left by years of absence and indifference. "Thank you, my son," he said, squeezing his grandson's hand. "You are a blessing in my life." That same night, Luke began researching physical therapy professionals. He needed someone competent and trustworthy to care for his grandfather. Among the resumes he analyzed, one caught his attention. Isabella Sanders, 19 years old, recently graduated with specializations in geriatric physical therapy. Despite her young age, she had excellent recommendations. He decided to schedule an interview for the next day. Little did he know that this decision would completely change the course of their lives. Isabella's arrival at the Anderson mansion would be just the beginning of a plot that would reveal painful truths and test family bonds like never before. The next morning, Luke was preparing coffee while Walter browsed the newspaper on the veranda. A fresh breeze came through the open windows of the mansion, bringing with it the scent of the roses that Eleanor had planted years ago. Luke's cell phone rang, announcing that Isabella Sanders, the physical therapist selected for the interview, had arrived at the main gate. "You can let her in, Arnold," Luke instructed the security guard through the intercom. Minutes later, the EE doorbell rang. Mrs. Olivia went to answer it and led the young woman to the veranda where Luke and Walter were talking. Isabella Sanders appeared in the doorway with confident posture, wearing dress pants and a modest blouse. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun, and her green eyes conveyed a surprising vivacity. Despite her young appearance, there was a presence about her that didn't go unnoticed. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Luke," she greeted them with a clear and firm voice. "I'm Isabella Sanders. Thank you for the opportunity of this interview." Walter observed the newcomer with curiosity. There was something in her posture that reminded him of Eleanor in her youth, that same determination in her gaze, that quiet confidence. "Please, sit down," Walter invited, indicating the nearby chair. Luke began the interview by asking about her education and experience. Isabella, despite being young, spoke with authority about rehabilitation techniques and demonstrated specific knowledge in physical therapy for the elderly. "I graduated recently, but I did internships at 2 clinics specializing in elderly patients," she explained, maintaining eye contact with both men. "I believe that physical therapy goes beyond physical recovery. It's also a way to restore autonomy and dignity to people." Walter leaned forward, interested. "And why did you choose to work specifically with the elderly, Miss Sanders? A young woman like you might prefer more dynamic areas." Isabella smiled, revealing a subtle dimple in her left cheek. "I grew up with my grandparents. My parents worked a lot, and it was really my grandparents who raised me. When my grandfather had a stroke, I was 14. I saw how physical therapy helped him regain movement and, most importantly, the will to live. I decided then that this was what I wanted to do." Walter nodded, visibly touched by her response. Luke noticed his grandfather's interest and continued with some technical questions about the ankle sprain. With each answer, Isabella demonstrated not only knowledge but also sensitivity. "I'd like to do an initial assessment if you'll allow me," she said to Walter, who promptly agreed. With delicate but sure movements, Isabella examined the swollen ankle, asking questions about the intensity of the pain and the movements that caused discomfort. Walter, normally reserved with strangers, responded with surprising openness. "You'll need daily sessions at the beginning," she concluded after the assessment. We can start with light exercises and cold compresses to reduce the swelling. With discipline, I believe that in 3 weeks you'll be walking without difficulties." 3 weeks, Walter frowned. The doctor talked about a month or more. Isabella smiled again, confident. "If we follow the treatment correctly, and you're a good patient, I'm sure we can reduce that time." There was something in the certainty with which she spoke that inspired confidence. Luke and Walter exchanged glances, and the grandson understood that his grandfather had approved of the young physical therapist. "When can you start?" asked Luke. "Today, if you prefer. I brought my basic materials." The decision was made right there. Isabella would begin the sessions that afternoon, coming to the mansion daily for 2 hours. The cost of the treatment was agreed upon, and Luke noticed that she didn't try to inflate the prices upon seeing the luxury of the residence, another point in her favor. After the first session, Walter seemed more animated than Luke had seen him in a long time. During dinner, he mentioned several times the professionalism of the girl, as he already called her. "She has blessed hands," he commented, as he experienced some relief from the pain. "And she knows how to talk, doesn't keep that awkward silence like that nurse your father wanted to hire." Luke smiled, satisfied with the choice. In the days that followed, Isabella won not only Walter's trust, but also that of Mrs. Olivia, always suspicious of strangers who approached her employer. The young physical therapist brought renewed energy to the mansion, always arriving with a smile and interesting stories to share during the sessions. A week later, Luke had to return to the office for a meeting he couldn't postpone. He left his grandfather in the care of Mrs. Olivia and Isabella, who already knew the house routine well. That day, upon returning, he found Walter in the library, laughing at something Isabella had just told him. What surprised Luke was realizing that the physical therapy session had ended more than an hour ago, according to the clock on the wall. "Ah, Luke," exclaimed Walter upon seeing him. "Isabella was telling me about a patient who insisted on doing the exercises wearing a suit and tie. Hilarious." Isabella smiled, a little embarrassed. "Sorry for extending beyond the scheduled time, Mr. Luke. Time passed without us noticing." "There's no problem at all," replied Luke, analyzing the scene with curiosity. "The important thing is that my grandfather is enjoying himself." That wasn't the only time Isabella stayed beyond the contracted hours. As the weeks passed, it became common to find her talking with Walter in the library or in the garden, long after the sessions had ended. She showed genuine interest in the stories Walter told about the early days of his real estate empire, asking pertinent questions and really listening to the answers. "You know, Luke, Isabella suggested that I write a book," commented Walter, one afternoon as his grandson helped him with some documents. "Memories of a Builder," something like that. "That's a great idea, Grandpa. You have incredible stories to share. She said I can dictate and she'll help me take notes, since my arthritis makes it difficult to write for long periods." Luke noticed the sparkle in his grandfather's eyes when talking about the physical therapist. It was evident that Isabella had become more than a healthcare professional for Walter. She was now a friend, someone who brought light to his lonely days. At the beginning of the 3rd week of treatment, Isabella arrived at the mansion with a gift, a handcrafted album for Walter to start organizing photos and clippings for his memoirs. "I thought it would be a good start for your book," she explained, as Walter admired the gift with tearful eyes. "What kindness, girl. It's been so long since anyone has given me a present that wasn't on a commemorative date." Luke observed the scene with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was glad to see his grandfather so animated. On the other, something in the growing closeness between Walter and Isabella intrigued him. He couldn't define whether it was genuine concern or an involuntary jealousy of the space the young woman was conquering in his grandfather's life. One afternoon, when Luke was returning from work earlier than usual, he overheard a conversation between Walter and Isabella in the garden. They were sitting on the bench under the jabuticaba tree, and Walter was holding the young woman's hands in his, with a look that Luke couldn't decipher. "You've brought color to my days, Isabella," Walter was saying with a choked voice. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Walter. Your company is a gift to me, too." Luke backed away silently without making himself noticed. That scene disturbed him more than he would like to admit. Concern for his grandfather was beginning to take a more concrete form. Could it be possible that Isabella was manipulating the feelings of a vulnerable and lonely man? That night, during dinner, Luke noticed that Walter seemed distracted, with a constant smile on his lips. When Mrs. Olivia left the room to get dessert, he decided to approach the subject with caution. "Grandpa, you seem happy today." Walter looked at his grandson with bright eyes. "Isabella invited me to have dinner at her house this weekend. She said she wants to introduce me to her parents." Luke felt a tightness in his chest. "Dinner? At her house?" "Yes. She said she told her parents about me, about my stories, and they were curious to meet me." Luke took a deep breath, carefully choosing his words. "Grandpa, don't you find this invitation strange? I mean, she's your physical therapist?" Walter's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of disappointment. "Strange? Why would it be strange for a friend to invite another person to dinner?" His voice gained an unexpected firmness. "Do you think nobody can really enjoy my company without ulterior motives?" "That's not what I meant, Grandpa. I'm just worried." "Worried about what? About the foolish old man who might be being deceived?" Walter placed his napkin on the table with an abrupt movement. "I've lived enough to know when someone is sincere, Luke." The dinner ended in an awkward silence. It was the first time Walter and Luke had a disagreement, and both felt uncomfortable with the situation. Later, Luke tried to apologize, but his grandfather had already retired to his room, something unusual for someone who typically stayed in the library until late. The next day, when Isabella arrived for the session, Luke asked to speak with her privately in the office. The young woman followed him, maintaining the same professional demeanor as always. "Has something happened, Mr. Luke?" "Isabella, I'll be direct," he began, indicating a chair for her to sit down. "I'm concerned about the nature of your relationship with my grandfather." She blinked a few times, apparently surprised. "I don't understand. Is there a problem with the treatment?" "It's not about the treatment. It's about the time you spend here beyond the sessions, the gifts, and now this dinner invitation." Isabella straightened her posture, and her green eyes became more intense. "Mr. Luke, I have immense respect for your grandfather. He is an extraordinary man who has shared fascinating stories with me. If I've crossed any professional boundary, I apologize, but my admiration for him is genuine. I understand that it may seem that way to you, but I need to protect my grandfather. He's in a vulnerable, lonely moment, and that makes him incapable of forming new friendships." She interrupted with a calm but firm voice. "Your grandfather is not a child, Mr. Luke. He has the right to choose with whom he wants to share his time." Luke ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "You're 19 years old, Isabella. My grandfather. There's 75. What can people with such an age difference have in common?" She smiled sadly. "Souls don't have age, Mr. Luke, and sometimes we find more understanding and connection in people who don't share our generation. Your grandfather teaches me about resilience, about building something from nothing. That is priceless to me." Her argument caught him off guard. There was a sincerity in her words that made Luke question his own judgments. Could it be that he was being unfair? "I just don't want to see him hurt," he finally admitted. "He's already suffered enough abandonment." Isabella's expression softened. "On that, we completely agree. Your grandfather deserves all the affection and respect in the world, and that's exactly what I offer him, sincere friendship." Luke nodded, still not completely convinced, but willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. The conversation ended cordially, and Isabella went on to the session with Walter, who was waiting in the living room. What Luke didn't expect was that same night he would receive a call from Richard, his father. "Luke, I need to talk to you about an alarming situation." Richard's voice sounded concerned, something rare. "I heard that there's a young physical therapist practically living in your grandfather's house. Is that true?" Luke frowned. How had his father discovered about Isabella? "She's not living here, Dad. She comes daily for Grandpa's physical therapy sessions." "That's not what I was told. Arnold, the security guard, said she stays hours beyond her working hours. has dinner with you, and now has invited your grandfather to her house. Luke felt a pang of irritation. So the security guard was reporting to Walter's children what was happening in the mansion. Grandpa is a responsible adult. If he wants to have friends, what's the problem? The problem, Luke, is obvious. Richard's voice rose. A 19-year-old girl doesn't get close to a 75-year-old man for friendship. He's naive. He's not seeing her intentions. What intentions, Dad? Oh, please, money, of course. Your grandfather is a rich and lonely man, easy prey for opportunists. The conversation continued for 20 more minutes, with Richard insisting that Luke should open his eyes and protect the family's assets. In the end, he promised to talk with his siblings about the situation. Upon hanging up, Luke felt divided. His father's concerns echoed his own initial doubts about Isabella, but after getting to know her better and seeing the positive change she had brought about in Walter, he couldn't believe it was all just an elaborate plan to obtain money. On Saturday, the day of the dinner at Isabella's house, Walter was as nervous as a teenager on a first date. He asked Luke for help in choosing appropriate clothes and even buying flowers for the young woman's mother. Do you think tulips are appropriate? Helena always preferred roses, but I don't want to seem too formal, he asked while Luke helped him put on his blazer. Tulips are perfect, Grandpa, replied Luke, moved by his grandfather's enthusiasm. He had decided to give Isabella a vote, of confidence and support that unusual friendship, despite his father's warnings. When the taxi arrived to pick up Walter, Luke accompanied him to the door. Enjoy yourself, Grandpa. Call me if you need anything. Walter hugged his grandson tightly. Thank you for understanding, my son. You can't imagine how important it is to have someone who believes I can still have a life beyond these walls. Watching the taxi drive away, Luke felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Something told him that this dinner would mark the beginning of a new phase in Walter Anderson's life, for better or for worse. The dinner at Isabella's house transformed Walter. He returned to the mansion that night with a sparkle in his eyes that Luke hadn't seen in years. During breakfast the next day, Walter enthusiastically described the Sanders family's small apartment in the middle-class neighborhood, the simple but delicious food prepared by Isabella's mother, and the pleasant conversation with her father, a retired history teacher. They're authentic people, Luke, commented Walter, while savoring the coffee prepared by Mrs. Olivia. Mr. Carl has impressive knowledge about the history of our city. We talked for hours about how downtown has transformed over the last decades. Luke listened attentively, noting how his grandfather seemed rejuvenated. The ankle sprain was practically healed, but no one mentioned the end of the physical therapy sessions. And her mother, Mrs. Martha, showed me albums from when Isabella was a child, continued Walter with a smile. Did you know she always wanted to be a physical therapist? Since she was little, she played at healing her dolls. In the weeks that followed, a new routine was established at the Anderson mansion. Isabella continued coming daily, now more as a visitor than as a physical therapist. She and Walter spent hours in the library, working on the memoir book project, or walking through the garden while talking about architecture, history, and plans for the future. On a sunny Sunday, Walter surprised everyone by announcing during lunch, "I've invited Isabella to live here." Luke choked on his wine, while Mrs. Olivia dropped the dish she was holding. "Live here, Grandpa?" asked Luke once he recovered his breath. "Yes, this house is too big for a lonely old man," replied Walter naturally. "She's having difficulties paying the rent for her own office, and I offered your grandmother's old office for her to see her patients. In exchange, she'll have a room upstairs." The news caught Luke completely off guard. The closeness between Walter and Isabella had grown, but inviting her to live in the mansion seemed like too big a leap. "Grandpa, don't you think you're rushing things?" Walter faced his grandson with a serene but determined expression. "Rushing? Luke, for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel alone. Isabella brings life to this house. Why not share this surplus space with someone who appreciates my company? What do her parents think about this? They were concerned, of course. It's natural. But after we talked, they understood it would be an opportunity for her to start her career with more security." Luke took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. Before he could argue further, Walter added, "She'll move in next weekend. I'd like you to help her feel at home." The tone left no room for discussion. Walter had made his decision. That night, Luke couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to believe in the genuine friendship between Isabella and his grandfather, but he couldn't ignore his father's voice echoing in his head. "She has her eye on the money." The next morning, Luke decided to talk with Richard. They met at a discreet cafe downtown. "She's going to what?" exclaimed Richard, attracting curious glances from neighboring tables. "Live in the mansion. Luke, this is inadmissible. How did you allow this?" "I didn't allow anything, Dad. Grandpa is an adult, his own master. The house is his." Richard adjusted his expensive tie, visibly agitated. "You don't understand? This girl is playing a game. First she gets close as a professional, then becomes a friend. Now she's going to live there. The next step is obvious, which would be a romantic relationship." Richard lowered his voice, leaning over the table. "And then an altered will, a diverted inheritance. I've seen this movie before." Luke frowned. "Dad, I don't think that's it. She really seems to like Grandpa, his company." "Of course she seems to. That's how these con artists operate." Richard took a sip of his espresso, thoughtful. "I'm going to talk with my siblings. We need to intervene before it's too late." The meeting of Walter's children took place 2 days later in the company's conference room. All 5 were present: Richard, the oldest and CEO of the group; Frank, responsible for the financial area; Caroline, who commanded the marketing; Monica, in charge of the legal sector; and Greg, the youngest, who managed international operations. Luke was invited, but felt out of place among his uncles and father, all formally dressed and with grave expressions, as if they were about to discuss a business crisis, which, in their view, was exactly the case. "We need to take drastic action," declared Monica after Richard explained the situation. "We can request a psychological evaluation of Dad, claim he isn't in full mental capacity." "That would be too extreme," objected Frank. "I don't want to turn him against me. After all, legally, he's still the major shareholder." "Then what do you suggest?" asked Caroline, drumming her perfectly manicured nails on the table. "Let this opportunist take possession of everything we've built." Luke observed the discussion with increasing discomfort. None of them seemed genuinely concerned about Walter's emotional well-being, only with the assets. "What if we talk to him?" suggested Greg, always the most conciliatory. "Explain our concerns in a respectful way?" Richard shook his head. "I've already tried. He's completely enchanted by her. He won't listen to reason." "I think you're all exaggerating," Luke finally spoke up. "Isabella might really just be looking for a place to live and start her practice. Not everything revolves around Grandpa's money." 5 pairs of eyes turned to him with expressions ranging from incredulity to irritation. "Luke, your naivety is almost touching," commented Monica with disdain. "Dad's estate is valued at more than 15 million, not counting the properties and stocks. Do you really think a 19-year-old girl wouldn't do anything for a slice of that pie?" The discussion continued for another hour, without reaching a consensus on how to act. In the end, they decided that each would try, in their own way, to talk to Walter and express their concerns. Luke left the meeting with a weight in his chest, divided between loyalty to his grandfather and the doubts that the family had reinforced. On the day of Isabella's move, only Luke was present to help. Walter had insisted that his grandson participate, ignoring the evident discomfort between the two since the family meeting. Isabella arrived with few suitcases and boxes. All her belongings fit in a small rented car. "I don't have much," she explained with a shy smile upon seeing Luke observing the small quantity of belongings. "I've always been a minimalist." The room designated for her was on the 2nd floor overlooking the garden. It was a spacious room that had belonged to Caroline when she was younger, decorated with elegant furniture and a king-size bed that made Isabella's small body seem even more delicate when she sat on the edge of the mattress. "It's too beautiful," she murmured, running her hand over the silk bedspread. "Mr. Walter was very generous." Luke placed the last box on the floor and observed Isabella looking around, marveling. It was hard to believe that this young woman, with bright eyes and simple manners, was plotting a sophisticated con. "Isabella," he began, carefully choosing his words, "my grandfather is very happy with your presence here." "I'm happy to be here too," she replied sincerely. "Your grandfather is an extraordinary person. You know, when I started the sessions, I never imagined I would find such a special friend." There was a moment of silence before Luke continued. "I just want to make sure that, well, that the intentions are clear for everyone." Isabella's smile disappeared. "What do you mean exactly?" "My grandfather may seem strong, but he's emotionally vulnerable. The loneliness of the last few years—" Luke didn't finish the sentence, but his expression said it all. Isabella stood up, facing him directly. "Mr. Luke, I understand your concern. Really. But I'm not here to take advantage of Mr. Walter. I'm here because I found someone who believes in my professional potential and offered me an opportunity I couldn't refuse." She seemed sincere, but Luke had learned that appearances could be deceiving. Before they could deepen the conversation, Walter appeared at the door of the room, eager to show Isabella the space he had renovated to become her office. "Come, dear. I had those equipment you mentioned installed. I hope it's to your liking." Walter took Isabella by the hand, leading her out of the room with the enthusiasm of a child at Christmas. Luke followed them, observing the interaction with a mixture of hope and apprehension. His grandfather's genuine smile made him want to believe everything would be all right, but a shadow of doubt persisted. That night, during dinner, Luke noticed how Isabella naturally fit into the dynamics of the house. She chatted with Mrs. Olivia about recipes, listened attentively to Walter's stories, and asked insightful questions. She really seemed to belong in that place, as if destiny had filled an empty space that no one had noticed before. Perhaps, thought Luke, as he watched his grandfather laugh at something, Isabella had said, perhaps they were all wrong about her. The weeks turned into months, and Isabella became an integral part of the routine at the Anderson mansion. Her physical therapy office on the ground floor began to attract patients, mainly elderly people from the neighborhood who appreciated the welcoming environment and the accessible prices she practiced. Walter often boasted to visitors about the extraordinary talent of the young physical therapist. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 4 months after Isabella's move, the mansion received an unexpected visit. Richard appeared without warning, accompanied by Caroline and Frank. Luke, who had spent the morning helping his grandfather with organizing documents for the memoir book, immediately realized something was wrong from the determined expression on his relatives' faces. "Dad," Richard greeted Walter formally, barely disguising the tension in his voice. "We need to talk, as a family." Walter, seated in his favorite armchair in the library, looked up from the papers he was analyzing. "What?" "A pleasant surprise," he responded with subtle irony. "After almost half a year, my children remember they have a father." Caroline stepped forward, kissing her father's cheek with calculated affection. "Dad, we've always been busy with the company you built. You know how business is." Walter nodded, without responding. After the tense greetings, everyone settled into the sofas and armchairs in the library. Luke remained beside his grandfather, observing the scene with apprehension. "Where is your tenant?" asked Frank, looking around as if expecting to find Isabella hidden behind the bookshelves. "Isabella went to visit her parents," replied Walter. "It's Sunday, family lunch day for those who value such moments." The jab didn't go unnoticed. Richard cleared his throat, assuming the leadership of the conversation, as he always did. "Dad, we came because we're concerned." "All of us." "Concerned about what exactly?" "About you," Caroline intervened. "About the decisions you've been making lately." Walter laughed, a brief and humorless sound. "Decisions like giving a roof to a talented young woman who treats me with more respect and attention in 4 months than my own children have in the last 3 years. The atmosphere became even tenser. Frank, always the most direct, got to the point. "Dad, we know you've gotten quite close to this girl, Isabella. Richard told us you've been going out together, dinners, outings. And this is your problem." Because we fear she's taking advantage of your good faith," completed Caroline, leaning forward. "Dad, she's 19 years old. What would a girl that age want with a 75-year-old man if not money, is that it? Walter interrupted, his voice gaining a rare hardness. You think I'm so foolish that I can't distinguish genuine interest from opportunism? Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. Dad, it's not that. We just want to protect you. Protect me? Walter straightened in his armchair, his eyes shining with indignation. Where was this protection when I spent last Christmas alone? Or when I had that fall and stayed in the hospital without a single visit from any of you? An embarrassed silence took over the library. Luke observed the scene with a lump in his throat, divided between loyalty to his grandfather and partial understanding of the family's concerns. What do you really want? Walter finally asked. Be honest, at least once. Frank and Caroline exchanged glances. It was Richard who spoke. We want you to reconsider this girl's presence in your house. It's not appropriate. It's not safe. She may be manipulating your feelings to gain access to your assets. Walter observed his 3 children for a long moment. Then, with surprising calmness, he declared, I'm dating Isabella. The bomb was dropped. Caroline let out a strangled sound, while Frank's eyes widened. Richard visibly paled. What? He exclaimed, standing up. Dad, this is absurd. She could be your granddaughter. And you all could be present children, but you're not, Walter retorted coldly. The difference is that Isabella makes me happy. She listens to me, worries about me, makes me feel that I still have value. Luke, who until that moment had remained silent, felt as shocked as his uncles. His grandfather had never mentioned a romantic relationship with Isabella, only a close friendship. Grandpa, he began, uncertain, I didn't know. Walter softened his expression when looking at his grandson. It started naturally, Luke. I didn't want to comment until I was sure of my own feelings. With age, we learn not to confuse gratitude with love, but what I feel for Isabella is genuine. Caroline stood up, pacing back and forth. This is complete nonsense. Dad, she's obviously manipulating you. What could a 19-year-old girl want with a man your age besides your money? Walter smiled. Sadly, is it so hard to believe that someone might like me for who I am, not for what I have? In this case, yes. Richard slammed his fist on the side table. Dad, open your eyes. This is clearly a gold-digging scheme. The discussion continued. For almost an hour, the 3 children alternated between emotional pleas and rational arguments, trying to convince Walter that he was being deceived. Luke remained mostly silent, processing the revelation and observing his grandfather's unwavering determination. When they finally tired of arguing, Richard delivered the ultimatum. If you insist on this madness, we'll have to take legal measures. We can request a mental capacity evaluation and... He didn't complete the sentence. The look Walter gave him contained so much disappointment and hurt that the words died in his mouth. Leave my house, said Walter in a low but firm voice. All of you now. Dad, we're just trying to... Now. Walter's voice thundered through the library, making the books seem to vibrate on the shelves. Embarrassed and irritated, the 3 children withdrew, but not before Richard gave Luke a look that clearly said, Talk to him. Make him see reason. When the front door slammed, Walter collapsed in the armchair, suddenly looking much older and more tired. Luke approached, uncertain about what to say. Grandpa, are you okay? Walter passed his hand over his face in a gesture of exhaustion. They'll never understand, Luke, never. This dating story, is it true? The old man smiled slightly. Yes and no. Isabella and I have a special connection. She treats me with an affection that goes beyond a simple friendship. But it's nothing like what they think. Luke sat on the arm of the armchair, placing his hand on his grandfather's shoulder. Why did you say that then? To provoke them, I admit. I wanted to see how far their obsession with my money goes. Walter looked at his grandson with tired eyes. And you, Luke? Do you also think I'm being a foolish old man? Luke hesitated. He had his doubts about Isabella, but he had seen how much she had made his grandfather happy in the last few months. I think you deserve to be happy, Grandpa. With whoever it may be. That night, when Isabella returned from lunch with her family, she found Walter on the veranda, contemplating the garden illuminated by moonlight. She sat beside him in silence for a few minutes before asking, "Did something happen today?" Mrs. Olivia seemed agitated when I arrived. Walter briefly reported the visit from his children, omitting the part where he announced a supposed relationship between them. Isabella listened attentively, her face expressing growing indignation. "They really think I'm here for your money, don't they?" she concluded when Walter finished. "How ironic." "Why?" She hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. "Because money is the last thing that matters to me. I've always lived with little and been happy. What I found here, your friendship, your stories, the mutual respect, and that's priceless." Walter smiled, touched by the sincerity he perceived in her words. They remained in silence for some time, until Isabella spoke again, her voice lower and more hesitant. "Mr. Walter, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." Walter's heart accelerated. Would it be a confession? Had he misinterpreted her intentions all this time? "What is it, dear? You can tell me anything." Isabella took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "It's about the will and about your life insurance." The words fell like stones in the tranquil environment. Walter felt a tightness in his chest. Could his children be right after all? "What about them?" "I would like—" Isabella hesitated again, staring at her own hands. "I would like to be included in them." Walter was paralyzed, the shock visible in every line of his face. "You want me to include you in my will?" he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Isabella nodded, now looking directly into his eyes. "Yes, I think it would be the fairest thing, considering our closeness." The silence that followed seemed to contain all the weight of the disappointment, Walter felt. After so many months, after trusting her, defending her before his children, was this what she wanted? His money? "I see," he finally responded, with a calmness that surprised even himself. "Yes, Isabella, you're right." The young woman blinked, apparently surprised by the ease of his agreement. "So, you'll do it?" "Yes," replied Walter, his face an impenetrable mask. "Tomorrow I'll speak with my lawyer." Isabella smiled, a smile that Walter couldn't completely decipher. Was it relief? Triumph? There was something strange about that moment, something that didn't fit the image he had formed of her. "Thank you, Mr. Walter. This means a lot to me." After she retired, Walter remained on the veranda for hours, alone with his thoughts. The stars seemed to mock his naivety, and the cold night wind reflected the ice he now felt in his heart. The next morning, Luke immediately noticed that something had changed. His grandfather was more silent, more distant, and avoided looking directly at Isabella during breakfast. The young woman in turn seemed strangely satisfied, almost relieved. "Grandpa, did something happen?" Luke asked when they were alone in the library. Walter observed his grandson for a moment, as if assessing how much he could trust him. Finally, with a controlled voice but laden with emotion, he told about the conversation from the previous night. "She asked to be included in the will, Luke, and in the life insurance." His voice faltered slightly. "After everything I did for her, after defending her against my own children, that's what she wanted." Luke felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Anger that Isabella had betrayed his grandfather's trust. Sadness for seeing the pain in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" An enigmatic smile appeared on Walter's face. "Exactly what I promised. I'm going to include her in the will." "But Grandpa—" "Trust me, Luke. I know what I'm doing." There was something in Walter's tone of voice, a calculated determination, that Luke didn't recognize. The old man, who had always been gentle and conciliatory, now exhibited a different facet, harder, more strategic. Luke realized that, despite his advanced age, Walter Anderson was still the same astute man who had built an empire from scratch. 3 days later, Walter announced during dinner that he had lost his entire fortune in a failed investment. Walter's announcement during dinner fell like a bomb. "I lost everything," he declared with disconcerting serenity. "I made a risky investment in cryptocurrencies. The market crashed last night." Luke, who hadn't been alerted about this declaration, choked on his wine. Isabella visibly paled, letting her fork fall on the plate with a sharp clink. "Everything," she asked with a trembling voice. "But how is that possible?" "Greed, my dear," replied Walter, calmly cutting the steak on his plate. "Even at 75, we're not immune to it. When they offered me the possibility of tripling my estate in weeks, I couldn't resist." Luke observed the scene, confused. His grandfather had never mentioned interest in cryptocurrencies or high-risk investments. Something didn't make sense. "And the company?" he asked, trying to understand. "The shares I own plummeted with the scandal. I'll have to sell this house to pay the debts." Mrs. Olivia, who was serving dessert, let out a muffled groan. She had worked for the family for decades, and the mansion was her home as much as it was Walter's. "Don't worry, Olivia," Walter reassured her. "I'll ensure you have a good place to live, no matter what happens." The rest of the dinner proceeded in a heavy silence. Isabella barely touched her dessert, her eyes fixed on her plate while her mind seemed to work frantically. When she finally stood up, her expression was composed, but Luke noticed the tension in her shoulders. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls," she said, hastily withdrawing. As soon as they were alone, Luke confronted his grandfather. "What's going on, Grandpa? I know you haven't lost any money." Walter smiled enigmatically. "No? How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. You've always been conservative with investments. You'd never risk everything in cryptocurrencies." The old man leaned back in his chair, observing his grandson with pride. "You're right, my son, I haven't lost anything, but I wanted to see her reaction." "And what did you think?" "Revealing," Walter replied simply. The next morning during breakfast, Walter announced that he would schedule a meeting with a real estate broker to assess the mansion. Isabella, who seemed not to have slept well, tried to disguise her discomfort. "Mr. Walter, maybe there are other solutions. You don't need to sell your home." "What solutions, dear?" he asked with calculated innocence. "I don't have resources anymore. The banks froze my accounts while they investigate the suspicious transactions. I could help. My practice is starting to make a profit and—" Walter smiled gently. "Your money would be a drop in the ocean of my debts, Isabella. But I appreciate the intention." 2 days later, Richard and the other children appeared at the mansion, all visibly upset. Luke, who had been urgently called by his grandfather, arrived in time to witness the confrontation in the library. "Is it true?" demanded Richard, brandishing a tablet where a sensationalist headline about the bankruptcy of real estate magnate Walter Anderson could be read. "Dad, how could you do something so irresponsible?" "You always said I was too old to make financial decisions," replied Walter calmly. "It seems you were right." "And the company? Our shares are plummeting. Investors are in panic. The company remains solid. It's just my personal assets that were compromised." Caroline, always the most pragmatic, intervened. "Dad, we need transparency. How much exactly did you lose? What assets still remain?" Walter sighed, deeply. "Practically nothing. The house, some objects of sentimental value, maybe $1 million in life insurance that I couldn't cancel." The children exchanged horrified looks. The fortune, estimated at $15 million, plus the mansion valued at another $8 million, reduced to practically nothing. It was a devastating blow for the family that had always lived in the shadow of that wealth. "How could you be so irresponsible?" lamented Monica, who until then had remained silent. "A lifetime of work." "Don't worry so much about me," replied Walter. "Worry about yourselves. Because if you depended on my inheritance to maintain your lifestyles, you'll have to revise your plans." The meeting continued for hours, with the children alternating between accusations, laments, and occasional offers of help that sounded more like obligation than genuine concern. Luke observed everything in silence, still trying to decipher his grandfather's true plan. Meanwhile, upstairs, Isabella was packing her bags. When Luke went up to check on her, he found her methodically folding her clothes. "Leaving?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't seem surprised by his presence. "My parents are sick," she replied without looking at him. "I need to take care of them for a while." What a convenient coincidence. Isabella finally raised, her eyes facing him directly. "What are you insinuating, Luke?" "Nothing. I just find it interesting that your parents get sick exactly when my grandfather announces he lost everything." A blush rose up her neck, but her voice remained calm. "Think what you want. I don't owe you any explanations. To my grandfather, yes, after everything he did for you." Isabella closed the suitcase with an abrupt movement. "Your grandfather understands my situation. We've already talked." Late that afternoon, Isabella left. Her farewell to Walter was brief and formal, without the warmth that previously characterized their interactions. The old man watched the taxi drive away with an impenetrable expression. "She's not coming back, is she?" commented Luke, standing beside his grandfather at the door. "No," replied Walter simply. "She won't." That night, seated in the library with 2 glasses of aged whiskey, grandfather and grandson finally spoke openly. "I never kissed that girl, you know," confessed Walter, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. "Not once. Our relationship never went beyond conversations and some hand-holding walks." "Why did you lie to your children then?" "To provoke them, to see how far their concern, with my money, not with me, would go." Walter took a sip of whiskey, and it worked perfectly. Luke hesitated before asking, "And Isabella? Do you really believe she was here just for the money?" A shadow of sadness passed over the old man's face. "At the beginning, no. I think she really enjoyed my company, my stories, but at some point the temptation became too great." "And you never suspected before?" Walter smiled with melancholy. "Of course I did. I'm old, Luke, not naive, but sometimes we prefer to believe in the illusion that makes us happy rather than the truth that hurts us." In the weeks that followed, life at the Anderson mansion entered a new rhythm. The news of Walter's bankruptcy quickly spread throughout. The city and many so-called friends disappeared. The children, after the initial commotion, began taking turns in quick visits, more out of obligation than genuine affection. It was during this period that Marianne entered their lives. A 28-year-old young woman who had recently moved to the neighboring house, she appeared one day bringing a basket of homemade bread. "I heard about your financial problems," she said simply, as she handed the basket to Walter. "My grandmother always said that problems seem smaller with a full stomach." Unlike Isabella, Marianne didn't have conventional beauty or calculatedly gentle manners. She was an authentic person, sometimes awkward in her sincerity. She worked as a literature teacher at a local public school and lived modestly. Her visits became frequent, first bringing food, then offering to help Walter with organizing the library that he was thinking of selling. She didn't show pity, just genuine solidarity. "My father passed away last year," she told him one afternoon while cataloging the books. "I know how difficult it is to face changes alone." Luke, who initially maintained a defensive posture after the experience with Isabella, gradually found himself captivated by Marianne's authenticity. On the occasions when they met at the mansion, they talked about literature, philosophy, and the small details of life that really mattered. A special bond began to form between them, something that Walter observed with discreet contentment. It was as if, amid the financial chaos he supposedly faced, a new possibility of happiness emerged not for him, but for his beloved grandson. 3 months passed. The mansion remained intact, despite rumors of imminent sale. Walter vaguely explained that legal processes were delaying the transaction. Meanwhile, Marianne had become a constant presence, bringing not just food and practical help, but mainly human warmth and sincere conversations. On a Sunday afternoon, Walter surprised Luke and Marianne with an unexpected announcement. "My health is deteriorating," he said with disturbing serenity. "The doctor gave me a few months at most." The news was devastating. Tests were done, specialists consulted, but the diagnosis remained nebulous. Walter refused to discuss details, insisting only that he wanted to spend his last days in peace, in the mansion he loved. The children, informed of the situation, reacted with varying degrees of consternation. Visits that were previously rare became more frequent, although brief and formal. Richard, in particular, seemed genuinely shaken. "If you need anything, Dad," he offered, showing concern that seemed sincere for the first time in years. "What?" "I need Richard, you can't give me," replied Walter with a sad smile. "The time you didn't have for me when I had health." The weeks passed, and Walter seemed to slowly waste away. He began using a wheelchair to move around the house, always assisted by Luke or Marianne, who had practically moved in to help with daily care. It was during this period that Luke and Marianne grew even closer. Sharing the burden of caring for Walter, they found moments of deep connection amid the sadness. Walter observed the development of that relationship with a special sparkle in his eyes. "She's the right person for you," he commented one night, when Marianne had gone out to fetch medications. "Don't let fear of the past overshadow the possibilities of the future." Luke understood the advice. Marianne was different from Isabella in every possible aspect. She didn't ask for anything, she only gave. She didn't care about the supposed bankruptcy of the family, only about Walter's well-being and, increasingly, about Luke's. A week before what Walter called his departure, he asked Luke to gather the entire family for the early reading of the will. "I want to see their reactions," he explained with an enigmatic smile. A last wish from a stubborn old man. The day arrived. The library was prepared to receive all of Walter's children, plus Luke and Marianne. To everyone's surprise, Isabella was also summoned. She appeared visibly embarrassed, thinner and more worn down than Luke remembered. The family lawyer, Dr. Mitchell, began the session with appropriate solemnity. Walter, seated in his wheelchair, observed each face with meticulous attention. "Before we begin the formal reading," announced Dr. Mitchell, "Mr. Walter has prepared a video message that he would like everyone to watch." The television was turned on, and Walter's face appeared on the screen. It wasn't the frail Walter of now, but a version recorded months before, still strong and vigorous. "My dear ones," he began in the video, "if you're watching this, it means I'm reaching the end of my journey. Before the formal will is read, there are some truths that need to be told." The room was in complete silence. "First, I never lost my fortune. The cryptocurrency investment, the imminent bankruptcy, all of it was a carefully elaborated farce." Exclamations of surprise filled the library. Richard stood up abruptly, while Isabella visibly paled. "I wanted to discover who really cared about me, not my money," continued Walter in the video. "And I found out. My children, who rarely visited me, suddenly appeared concerned when they thought I was bankrupt. Isabella, who proclaimed a special affection for me, disappeared as soon as she learned I had nothing more to offer financially." Isabella lowered her head, unable to face the accusatory looks that turned to her. "But I also discovered who really cares. Luke, my grandson, who stood by my side regardless of my financial situation. And Marianne, an extraordinary young woman, who offered friendship and support to a supposedly bankrupt old man without asking for anything in return." Walter in the video paused, his eyes seeming to penetrate the screen to connect directly with those present in the room. "As for my health, I'm perfectly fine. The doctors have given me at least 10 more years if I continue taking care of myself. Once again, I wanted to see who would truly be devastated by my death, for who I am, not for what I have." Luke couldn't believe it. He looked at his grandfather, in the wheelchair, who was now smiling openly, abandoning the facade of fragility he had maintained for months. "Now, about my real will," continued the video Walter. "My estate remains intact, approximately 15 million in various investments, this mansion valued at 8 million, and a life insurance policy worth $1 million. The video ended, and the real Walter took the floor, rising from the wheelchair with a vitality that shocked everyone. "Surprise," he said simply with an ironic smile. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses before opening the sealed envelope that contained the official will. "According to the wishes of Mr. Walter Anderson, the assets will be distributed as follows. 50% of his fortune, including the mansion, will go to his grandson, Luke Anderson." Luke blinked, surprised by his grandfather's generosity. 30% will be divided equally among his 5 children, under the condition that each dedicates at least 10 hours monthly to volunteer work at charitable institutions for a minimum period of 5 years. The children looked at each other, stunned. 20% will be donated to institutions supporting abandoned elderly people. Dr. Mitchell paused before continuing. The life insurance, in the amount of $1 million, will be entirely allocated to Miss Marianne Oliver as gratitude for her disinterested dedication. Marianne gasped, her eyes welling with tears. As for Miss Isabella Sanders, Mr. Walter leaves a key to a safe deposit box at the central bank, with instructions that only she can open it. Isabella, who had remained downcast during the entire reading, raised her head with a spark of hope in her eyes. Perhaps there were jewels, money, something valuable reserved especially for her. Walter approached her, personally handing her a small golden key. "The safe is reserved to be opened tomorrow at 10 a.m., he informed her. "I'll be eager to know your reaction." The next morning, Isabella went to the bank with her heart racing. Following the instructions, she was led to the safe deposit box room. With trembling hands, she inserted the key into the lock of the indicated. Upon opening it, she found only 2 items: a coffee cup, completely cold, and an envelope with her name. Confused, she opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter. "Dear Isabella, for you I leave this cup of cold and bitter coffee, just like the love you offered me. I believed for a time that I had found in you a genuine soul, someone who saw beyond my money and position. I was mistaken. I hold no grudge. In fact, I thank you for the lesson you gave me in my final years, that we should always value those who stand by our side in difficult moments, not in moments of abundance. I sincerely hope that one day you learn that the true riches of life are not kept in safes." Walter Anderson. Isabella left the bank in tears, carrying only the letter and the weight of regret. Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, Luke and Marianne were helping Walter organize a small celebration in the garden. The old man, freed from the farce of the terminal illness, moved with the renewed energy of someone who had taken an enormous weight off his shoulders. "You know, Grandpa, that was probably the most elaborate revenge I've ever seen," commented Luke as they arranged the tables under the tree. Walter smiled. "It wasn't revenge, my son, it was a lesson for all of us." Marianne, who was tying delicate flower arrangements to the chairs, looked at Walter with admiration. "You're a wise man, Mr. Walter, a bit dramatic, but wise." The 3 laughed, sharing a complicity that transcended money, schemes, and disappointments of the past. That afternoon, as the family gathered for a meal that symbolized a new beginning, Walter observed with satisfaction the way Luke and Marianne interacted. The affectionate looks, the discreet touches, the natural harmony of 2 people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances. "I think my next project will be planning a wedding," he murmured to himself, smiling as he saw his grandson and the neighbor sitting side by side, their hands discreetly intertwined under the table. The Anderson mansion, which for so long had echoed with the silence of loneliness, now filled with the voices of a family that, after many painful lessons, was beginning to relearn the true meaning of the word inheritance. Not material possessions, but the values and love that survive far beyond any will. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Walter, Luke, and Isabella has touched your hearts. The lessons about genuine love, material interest, and the true nature of human relationships are eternal, as is the value of loyalty in difficult times. To continue this journey of emotions and reflections, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about intergenerational relationships, second chances, and surprising revelations. Find it by clicking on the link available in the description. If this narrative awoke something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give that like. That helps us so much. Each week we bring new stories that explore the different tones of the human experience, with twists that will keep you always anxious for the next episode. And don't forget to leave in the comments, what was your favorite part of this story? Did you suspect Isabella from the beginning? Or were you surprised by Walter's elaborate plan? We want to know your opinion. Until the next story, where new characters, dilemmas, and emotions await you.